Everyone laughed at him. A blind beggar they thought was weak. No one noticed the young orphan girl who quietly helped him every day. But what they didn't know was that he owned the company they worked for, and he was testing them. He had a secret, a ticking clock in his chest, and only one chance to find someone worthy to lead his empire. And the girl they mocked would soon become the most powerful person in the room. What happened next will shock them all.
Before you continue, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this powerful.
The morning rush in the city had already begun. Cars honked impatiently, people hurried along the sidewalks with coffee cups in their hands. Tall glass buildings reflected the bright sunlight as if the entire city was made of shining mirrors. At the center of the business district stood one of the most powerful companies in the country, Whitmore Global. A massive 20-story building made of steel and glass towered over the busy street. Employees in elegant suits walked through the rotating doors every morning, chasing promotions, money, and power. But right outside the company gate sat a man no one wanted to notice. He looked old. His clothes were faded and worn. A thin gray beard covered part of his tired face. In his hand was a simple wooden walking stick. Dark glasses covered his eyes. Beside him sat a small metal cup with a few scattered coins inside. Everyone who passed him knew exactly what he was, a blind beggar, or at least that's what they believed. Some employees ignored him completely, others laughed quietly as they walked past. One young worker tossed a coin into the cup and joked to his friend, "Maybe one day he'll become the CEO." Both men burst into laughter as they entered the building. Another woman wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Why does security allow beggars here?" A security guard walked over and shook his head at the old man. "I told you yesterday not to sit here." The blind man slowly lifted his head. His voice was calm and gentle. "I'm sorry, sir. I will move soon." The guard sighed and walked away, but the old man didn't move. Instead, he quietly listened. Every voice, every laugh, every insult, every careless word spoken by the people walking into that giant building. Hours passed. More employees arrived. Some dropped coins into his cup without looking at him. Some pretended he didn't exist. Then suddenly, a loud voice interrupted the morning air. "Well, look who's here again." A tall man in an expensive suit stopped in front of the blind beggar. His name was Richard Collins, one of the company's senior managers. He looked down at the old man with clear irritation. "You again?" Richard said mockingly. "Don't you have another street to beg on?" The blind man lowered his head politely. "I apologize if my presence bothers you, sir." Richard scoffed. "Bothers me, no." He leaned closer and smirked. "But you're ruining the view of our building." A few employees nearby laughed. One of them whispered loudly, "Maybe he's waiting for a job interview." More laughter followed. Richard kicked the small metal cup lightly with his shoe. Coins rolled across the pavement. "Oops," he said, with fake sympathy. "Looks like your fortune's spilled." The workers around him chuckled as they walked into the building. The blind man slowly reached down, searching the ground with trembling fingers. His hand brushed against the cold pavement as he tried to gather the scattered coins. But before he could reach them, another pair of hands gently picked up the coins. A soft voice spoke quietly. "Here, let me help you." The blind man paused. A young woman knelt beside him, carefully collecting the coins and placing them back into the cup. Her clothes were simple, very simple. Not like the polished suits worn by the others. She wore a plain cleaning uniform, slightly worn from years of use. Her name was Emily Carter. Unlike the others, she didn't look embarrassed to be near him. She placed the final coin into the cup and gently returned the walking stick to his hand. "There you go," she said kindly. The blind man tilted his head slightly toward her voice. "Thank you," he replied softly. Emily smiled. "You're welcome." Just then, two employees walking past noticed her helping him. One of them laughed. "Emily, are you starting a charity service now?" The other added mockingly, Be careful, if you help him too much, he'll move into your apartment. They both laughed loudly. Emily ignored them. Instead, she reached into her small bag and pulled out a wrapped piece of bread. It was clearly meant to be her breakfast. She gently placed it in the blind man's hands. "You should eat something," she said. The old man hesitated. "You need this more than I do." Emily shook her head. "I'll be fine." Then she stood up and walked toward the side entrance used by cleaning staff. The blind man sat quietly for a moment, holding the bread, listening to the fading sound of her footsteps. Then slowly, his hand moved inside his worn coat. He pulled out a small leather notebook. Carefully, he wrote something inside, one simple line: "Emily Carter, kind heart." Then he closed the notebook. For a brief second, the old man lifted his dark glasses slightly. His eyes were not cloudy like a blind man's. They were sharp, observant, watching everything. And as he looked toward the towering building of Whitmore Global, a faint whisper escaped his lips. "Let the test continue." Because the truth was something no one outside that building could imagine. The blind beggar sitting at the company gate was the man who built it, and the test had only just begun. The next morning arrived colder than the day before. A thin fog hung over the city streets, and the glass walls of Whitmore Global reflected the pale sunlight like a silent giant watching the busy road below. Employees hurried toward the entrance as usual, coffee cups in one hand, phones in the other. But outside the company gate, the blind beggar had already returned. He sat in the same spot as always, his worn coat wrapped tightly around his thin body. His walking stick rested against his knee, and the small metal cup lay beside him with only 2 coins inside. To most people walking by, he was invisible, just another unfortunate soul sitting on the sidewalk, but to some employees, he had become entertainment. 2 young workers approaching the building spotted him immediately. One of them nudged the other. "Look," he whispered, grinning, "the company's favorite decoration is back." They both laughed. One of them bent down and waved his hand in front of the old man's face. "Hey, old man," he said mockingly, "can you see this?" The other worker burst out laughing. "Of course he can't see it, idiot. He's blind." More laughter followed as they walked away. The blind man didn't react. He simply sat quietly, listening to every voice, every careless word, every insult that passed through the morning air. Then the loud roar of an expensive car engine stopped near the gate. A sleek black car pulled up. Out stepped Richard Collins. He adjusted his expensive suit jacket and walked confidently toward the building, but as soon as his eyes landed on the blind man, he stopped. Again, his face twisted with annoyance. "You again?" Richard said loudly. Several employees nearby slowed down to watch. Richard walked closer and folded his arms. "Do you know how much this building costs?" he asked sarcastically. The blind man lowered his head politely. "No, sir." Richard smirked. "More money than you'll ever see in 10 lifetimes. A few workers nearby chuckled. Richard continued, "And yet every morning I come here, and the first thing I see is you." He looked around at the crowd gathering. "Maybe we should put a company badge on him," he joked. "Employee of the month, the blind beggar." The crowd erupted with laughter. One man clapped. Another employee pulled out his phone as if recording the scene. The blind man quietly tightened his grip on his walking stick, but he said nothing. Richard stepped closer and nudged the metal cup with his shoe again. Coins rolled across the ground. The laughter grew louder, and just as the old man slowly bent down to search for them, a familiar voice spoke. "That's not funny." The laughter faded. Everyone turned. Standing behind them was Emily Carter. She held a small plastic bag of cleaning supplies and looked directly at Richard. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. Richard raised an eyebrow. "Well, well," he said slowly. "The cleaning girl again." Some workers laughed quietly. Emily walked forward and knelt beside the blind man. She picked up the scattered coins and placed them back into the cup. Then she helped him sit upright again. Richard shook his head in disbelief. "You really enjoy embarrassing yourself, don't you?" Emily stood up and faced him. He hasn't done anything wrong. Richard laughed, except lowering the value of our company entrance. A man behind him added jokingly, maybe she wants him to work in her department. More laughter. But Emily didn't laugh. Instead, she reached into her small bag. This time she pulled out a small bottle of water and placed it gently into the blind man's hands. "You should drink something," she said softly. The old man hesitated again. "You are very kind," he replied quietly. One of the workers scoffed loudly. "Kind?" he said. "She's just another poor person helping someone poorer." Another added, "Two beggars helping each other." More laughter. Emily's face turned slightly red, but she didn't respond. She simply smiled at the blind man. "Take care," she said before turning toward the staff entrance. But just before she walked away, the blind man spoke. His voice was calm but curious. "May I ask you something?" Emily turned back. "Yes?" The blind man tilted his head slightly. "Why are you kind to someone who cannot repay you?" For a moment, Emily seemed surprised by the question. Then she smiled softly. "My mother used to say something before she passed away." The crowd nearby grew quieter. Emily continued, "She said the way we treat people who cannot help us shows the kind of heart we truly have." The words hung in the air. The blind man froze slightly. Something in his expression changed, something deep, something emotional. Emily gave a small nod and walked inside the building. The employees slowly returned to their routines, some still laughing, some shaking their heads. But the blind man remained very still. Minutes passed, then slowly. His hand reached inside his coat. He pulled out the same small leather notebook. He opened it carefully, under the line that read, "Emily Carter, kind heart." He wrote another sentence, "Kindness without expectation." He closed the notebook slowly, and for the first time that morning, a faint smile appeared on his face, because the test was revealing something powerful, something rare, something he had been searching for, and inside the towering building of Whitmore Global. Many people were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. But for now, none of them realized the truth. The blind beggar they laughed at every day was the man who owned the company they worked for, and the test had only just begun. The morning crowd slowly disappeared into the towering building of Whitmore Global. The loud chatter faded, the busy sidewalks became quieter, and once again, the blind beggar sat alone near the company gate. Cars passed by, wind moved gently through the city streets. To anyone looking from a distance, he was just another forgotten man sitting by the road. But the truth was far more complicated. Slowly, the old man lifted his head. He listened carefully. Footsteps, voices, car doors. Every sound mattered. After several minutes, he reached up and slowly removed the dark glasses covering his eyes. For the first time that morning, his eyes opened fully. They were clear, sharp, very much alive. This man was not blind, not even close. His name was Daniel Whitmore, and the massive company rising behind him belonged to him. Years ago, Daniel Whitmore had been one of the most respected businessmen in the country. He had built Whitmore Global from nothing, just a small technology office with 3 employees. But through determination, intelligence, and bold decisions, the company grew into a powerful international corporation, thousands of employees, billions in revenue, buildings across multiple countries. Daniel Whitmore had everything most people dream about: power, respect, success. But life has a strange way of reminding even the most powerful people that nothing lasts forever. 3 months ago, Daniel sat inside a quiet hospital room. The soft beeping of medical machines filled the silence. A doctor stood in front of him with a heavy expression. "Mr. Whitmore," the doctor said carefully, "we've run the tests several times." Daniel leaned back in his chair calmly. He had already sensed the truth before the doctor spoke. "Just tell me," Daniel said quietly. The doctor sighed. "It's a rare heart condition." Daniel remained silent. "With the current progression of the disease, you may only have a limited amount of time." The room felt colder. "Months?" Daniel asked. The doctor hesitated. Possibly. Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't panic, he didn't shout, he simply looked out the hospital window. All his life he had built something powerful, but suddenly he realized something terrifying. He had built an empire. But he had no one he truly trusted to protect it. Many of the executives in his company had grown greedy over the years. Power had changed them. They cared more about profit than people. Daniel had seen the warning signs long ago, but now his time was running out. He needed someone who could lead Whitmore Global with something more important than intelligence. He needed someone with a good heart, someone who would protect the employees, someone who understood compassion, but such people were hard to find inside powerful offices, because power often hides people's true character. That was when Daniel made a decision, a strange one, a risky one. He disappeared from public life. The media reported that he had retired. Some believed he had moved abroad. Others thought he had become too ill to appear in public. But none of those stories were true. Instead, Daniel Whitmore shaved his beard differently, wore old clothes, picked up a walking stick, put on dark glasses, and returned to his own company as a blind beggar, because when people believe someone is powerless, they stop pretending. They reveal their real selves: kindness, cruelty, arrogance, compassion. Daniel wanted to see it all. Every day he sat outside the company entrance. Every day he listened. Every day he recorded what he learned in his small notebook, and what he discovered was heartbreaking. Many employees who spoke about company values inside the office were cruel outside the door. Managers who talked about leadership showed no kindness to a man they believed was helpless. Executives who praised teamwork laughed when a blind man struggled to pick up coins. Daniel had seen enough to understand something painful. The company he built was slowly losing its humanity. But among all the arrogance, all the pride, all the cruelty, one person stood out: Emily Carter, the young orphan who cleaned offices at night, the girl with barely enough money to survive. Yet she was the only one who consistently showed kindness, not once, not twice, but every single day. Daniel looked down at the small notebook in his hands. He opened it again. Many pages were filled with observations. Some names had harsh notes beside them: cruel, mocking, arrogant, selfish. But one name looked different: Emily Carter. Under her name were several lines: helped gather coins, shared food, defended me against Collins, kindness without expectation. Daniel closed the notebook slowly. His eyes turned toward the large glass building behind him. Hundreds of employees worked inside, many of them believing they were important, many of them believing they understood leadership, but none of them knew the truth. Daniel Whitmore was still watching, still listening, still testing them, and the test was far from over, because deep inside his chest, his heart suddenly tightened. A sharp pain spread through his body. Daniel grabbed his chest and breathed slowly until the pain passed. The illness was getting worse. Time was running out. He knew that, which meant he needed to find the right person soon, the person who would protect everything he had built, the person who would lead Whitmore Global with compassion. Daniel looked again toward the staff entrance where Emily had disappeared earlier. A faint smile appeared on his face. "Perhaps," he whispered quietly, "perhaps I'm getting closer to the answer." He slowly placed the dark glasses back over his eyes, picked up the walking stick, and returned to the role everyone believed: the helpless blind beggar. But what no one realized was that the quiet man sitting at the gate was not begging for money. He was searching for something far more valuable: a good heart, and soon the entire company would discover the truth. But when that moment came, it would shock everyone. The sky over the city turned dark that afternoon. Thick clouds slowly covered the sun, and the bright glass walls of Whitmore Global reflected the gray color of the coming storm. Employees inside the building continued their work, typing on computers, attending meetings, and chasing deadlines. But outside the company gate, Daniel Whitmore sat quietly in his usual spot. His worn coat was wrapped around him as the wind grew stronger. The air carried the smell of rain. Daniel slowly opened the small notebook again. His fingers gently turned the pages filled with observations, names, notes, moments of kindness, moments of cruelty. Many entries disappointed him, but one name continued to stand out: Emily Carter. He looked at her name for a long moment. Then he quietly closed the notebook. His heart felt heavy that day. The pain in his chest had returned earlier that morning, stronger than before. The doctor's warning echoed in his mind. Your condition is progressing faster than expected. Daniel knew time was running out. If he wanted to find someone worthy to lead his company, the test needed to go deeper. Suddenly a drop of rain fell onto the pavement, then another. Within seconds the sky opened. Heavy rain poured down across the city. Employees rushed out of the building entrance, holding bags and folders over their heads as they ran toward their cars. Some cursed at the weather, others laughed as they splashed through puddles, but the blind beggar remained where he was. Rain soaked his clothes, water dripped from the edge of his coat. He slowly stood up, pretending to struggle with his walking stick. Then he took a few shaky steps forward, and suddenly he collapsed onto the wet pavement. His walking stick rolled away. The rain continued falling hard. People nearby noticed immediately, but instead of rushing to help, most simply stared. One employee paused for a moment before shrugging. He probably slipped, the man said before running toward his car. Another worker glanced down and laughed. Careful, he joked to his friend. The old beggar is performing today. Several people walked past him without stopping. One woman looked uncomfortable, but kept moving. I'll be late for my meeting, she murmured as she hurried inside. Daniel remained on the ground, his clothes soaked, rain falling against his face. The test had begun. Minutes passed, more employees walked by. Some stared, some ignored him completely. Then a familiar voice cut through the sound of rain. Oh no! It was Emily. She had just stepped out from the staff entrance holding a small umbrella. The moment she saw the blind man lying on the wet pavement, she dropped everything and ran toward him. Sir, can you hear me? She asked urgently. Daniel didn't move. Emily quickly knelt beside him, rain soaking her uniform. She gently lifted his shoulders. Sir, please wake up. A few employees nearby slowed down to watch. One of them shook his head. Don't bother, he said. He's probably pretending. Another worker laughed. Yeah, it's a trick beggars use to get sympathy. But Emily ignored them. She removed her small jacket and placed it over Daniel's shoulders to protect him from the rain. Someone please helps, she shouted, but the workers simply kept moving. One man muttered as he walked past, You're wasting your time. Emily's eyes filled with frustration. She carefully helped Daniel sit upright. Can you stand? She asked softly. Daniel groaned weakly, continuing his act. Emily looked around desperately. No one was helping. Finally, she reached into her small purse. Inside were a few crumpled bills. It was the little money she had saved for food that week. Without hesitation, she grabbed the money and ran across the street toward a small pharmacy. Minutes later, she returned with a bottle of water and some medicine. Her hands trembled slightly as she helped Daniel drink. Please take this, she said gently. The rain began to slow. Daniel slowly opened his eyes, pretending to recover. Thank you, he whispered weakly. Emily smiled with relief. I thought you were really hurt. Nearby, a group of employees stood under the building awning watching the scene. One of them laughed. Look at her, he said. Spending money on a street beggar. Another added, that girl will always stay poor with that kind of thinking. More quiet laughter followed, but Emily didn't hear them. She simply helped Daniel stand carefully. Can you walk? She asked. Daniel nodded slowly. Emily placed the walking stick back in his hand. Please be careful in the rain, she said kindly. Daniel paused for a moment. Then he spoke quietly. You have already done too much for me. Emily shook her head. No one deserves to be left alone like that. Her words were simple, but powerful. She gave him one last reassuring smile before picking up her cleaning supplies and walking back toward the building. Soon she disappeared through the staff entrance. Daniel remained standing in the rain. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he lifted his head and opened his eyes. The rain had nearly stopped. The clouds were beginning to break. Daniel watched the door where Emily had disappeared. His expression was no longer that of a helpless beggar. It was the look of a man who had just witnessed something deeply meaningful. He reached into his coat and pulled out the small leather notebook once more. Under Emily's name, he added another line, "Sacrificed her last money to help me." Then beneath it he wrote something else, a sentence that made his hand pause slightly. "She may be the one." Daniel closed the notebook slowly. His chest tightened again, reminding him of the illness slowly stealing his time. But for the first time in weeks, a small feeling of hope appeared in his heart. Because while many people had revealed cruelty during his test, one person had revealed something far more powerful, true kindness, and very soon, that kindness would change everything. Inside the towering building of Whitmore Global, the atmosphere was very different from the quiet street outside. Bright lights filled the large offices, computers hummed, employees moved quickly through the hallways carrying documents and tablets. Everything looked professional, everything looked successful, but behind the polished glass walls, something darker was growing. On the 15th floor, inside a luxurious conference room, several senior executives sat around a long table. The curtains were closed, the door was locked, and the conversation inside the room was not meant for ordinary employees to hear. At the head of the table sat Michael Turner, the company's chief operations officer, a tall man with sharp features and cold eyes. He tapped his pen slowly against the table as the others waited. Finally, he spoke. "We've waited long enough." One of the executives leaned forward. "You really think Whitmore isn't coming back?" Michael smirked. "No one has seen Daniel Whitmore in years." Another man nodded. "Some people say he's too sick to run the company. Others say he moved overseas." Michael leaned back in his chair confidently. "It doesn't matter where he is." He paused before continuing, "because the board is already losing patience." One woman across the table lowered her voice. "So, what exactly are you proposing?" Michael slid a folder across the table. Inside were several documents, contracts, financial reports, and a proposal. "We sell Whitmore Global to our partners overseas," Michael explained calmly. The room became silent. One executive frowned. "Sell the entire company?" Michael nodded. "For a price that will make all of us very wealthy." Another man slowly flipped through the pages. "This deal could make us billions." Michael's smile widened slightly, and without the founder here to interfere, he leaned forward. "No one will stop us." Several people in the room exchanged nervous looks. One of them finally asked the question everyone was thinking. "What if Daniel Whitmore suddenly returns?" Michael laughed softly. If he was coming back, he would have done so already. The room slowly relaxed. Greed began to replace hesitation. One by one, the executives began nodding. The decision was being made, and none of them realized. The very man they were discussing sat outside their building every day, listening, watching, waiting. Meanwhile, several floors below, Emily Carter quietly pushed her cleaning cart down a hallway. The smell of cleaning chemicals filled the air as she wiped down desks and empty workstations. Her movements were slow, careful, but her mind was troubled. She had spent the last of her savings helping the blind man the previous day. Now she barely had enough money left to buy food for the week. Still, she didn't regret it. As she cleaned one of the office desks, two employees walked into the hallway. They noticed her immediately. One of them smirked. "Hey, isn't that the girl who protects the blind beggar?" The other laughed. "Oh yeah, the charity queen." Emily kept cleaning, pretending not to hear. But their voices grew louder. "Maybe she plans to adopt him," one joked. "Or maybe they'll start a begging business together." Both men burst into laughter. Emily clenched the cloth in her hand but stayed silent. She finished wiping the desk and turned to push her cart away, but just as she reached the hallway corner, a stern voice stopped her. Emily Carter. She turned around quickly. Standing there was Richard Collins. His expression was cold. Behind him stood another supervisor. Richard crossed his arms. "I've received several complaints about you." Emily's heart skipped. "Complaints, sir?" Richard nodded. "Yes." He stepped closer. "Apparently you've been wasting work time helping that beggar outside." Emily felt her stomach tighten. "I only helped him when he collapsed yesterday." Richard interrupted her sharply. "This is a company, not a charity center." The supervisor beside him added, "Your job is to clean the offices, not rescue people from the street." Emily lowered her eyes. "I finished all my duties." Richard shook his head. "That's not the point." He pulled a paper from a folder and handed it to her. "Whitmore Global requires employees who stay focused on their responsibilities." Emily looked down at the paper. Her heart dropped. It was a termination notice. "You're firing me?" she whispered. Richard's voice remained cold. "You can collect your final payment at the accounting office." The hallway suddenly felt very quiet, very empty. Emily stood there for several seconds staring at the paper in her hands. She had no parents, no savings, and now, no job. Richard turned and began walking away, but before disappearing around the corner, he added one last sentence. "Maybe your blind friend can help you now." His footsteps faded down the hallway. Emily remained standing there. Alone, tears slowly filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She refused to cry in front of the other workers watching from their offices. Silently, she pushed her cleaning cart toward the exit. An hour later, Emily stepped outside the building. The afternoon sun had returned after the rain, and sitting in the same spot near the company gate was the blind beggar. Daniel Whitmore heard her footsteps approaching. "Emily," he asked gently. She tried to smile. "Yes, it's me." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "You sound tired today." Emily hesitated. Then she sat beside him on the pavement. For a moment she didn't speak. Finally she said quietly, "I lost my job." Daniel's hands tightened slightly around his walking stick, but he kept his voice calm. "I'm sorry." Emily forced a small smile. "It's okay." She looked toward the busy street. Sometimes life closes one door so another can open. Daniel listened carefully. Even after losing her job, she still spoke with hope. That simple strength moved him deeply. He slowly turned his head toward the towering building behind them. Inside that building were powerful executives plotting to sell the company, and outside that same building sat the one person who might truly deserve to lead it. Daniel whispered quietly to himself, "They have no idea what is coming." Because very soon, everything at Whitmore Global was about to change. The next morning felt different. Something in the air around Whitmore Global had changed. Employees arriving at the building noticed it immediately. Security guards stood straighter than usual. Several black luxury cars were parked near the entrance. Men in dark suits walked in and out of the building with serious expressions. Whispers began spreading through the morning crowd. "Did you hear? I think something big is happening today. Maybe the board of directors is visiting." Inside the building, the tension was even stronger. Managers hurried through the hallways. Assistants carried stacks of documents from one office to another. Phones rang constantly. Everyone seemed nervous. But no one knew exactly why. On the 15th floor inside the executive offices, Michael Turner stood near the window overlooking the city. He looked down at the street below. His confident expression slowly turned into a frown. "Why are there so many security vehicles today?" he muttered. Behind him, another executive adjusted his tie nervously. "I heard something strange this morning." Michael turned. "What?" The man hesitated before speaking. "There's a rumor spreading around the board members." Michael narrowed his eyes. "What rumor?" The executive swallowed. "They say the founder might be coming back." The room suddenly became silent. Michael stared at him for a moment. Then he laughed. "A rumor," he said dismissively. "No one has seen Daniel Whitmore for years." Another executive added quietly, "But the board did call an emergency meeting." Michael's smile faded slightly. "Emergency meeting?" The others nodded. One woman spoke softly. All senior executives were ordered to attend. Michael walked back toward the window slowly. He didn't like surprises, especially ones he couldn't control. Meanwhile, outside the company gate, the sidewalk looked strangely empty. For the first time in weeks, the blind beggar was not there. Employees passing the entrance noticed the empty space immediately. One worker glanced around. "Hey, where's the blind guy?" Another shrugged. Maybe he finally found another street. A third employee laughed. Or maybe he realized no one here cares. More people walked past without thinking much about it. Except one person. Emily Carter. She stood across the street holding a small paper bag. Inside the bag was a sandwich she had bought with the last of her money. She had come to bring it to the blind man like she did every morning. But today, his usual spot was empty. Emily looked around anxiously. "Where did he go?" she whispered. For some reason she felt worried, very worried. She walked slowly toward the place where he usually sat. The pavement was dry now, but the small metal cup he used was gone. His walking stick was gone. It was as if he had completely disappeared. Emily's heart sank. "I hope he's okay," she murmured softly. She stood there for a few moments before turning away slowly. Inside the building, the tension continued rising. A company-wide message suddenly appeared on every employee's computer screen. "Urgent notice. All department heads and senior staff must report to the main conference hall immediately." Employees stared at the message in confusion. "This is strange. What's going on?" I've never seen an emergency meeting like this before. Even workers who had been laughing earlier now looked nervous. Within minutes, the massive conference hall on the top floor began filling with executives, managers, and department leaders. Michael Turner entered the room confidently, but his eyes carefully scanned the space. Several members of the company's board of directors were already seated at the front. That alone was unusual. The board rarely appeared together unless something serious was happening. Michael leaned toward one of them. "What is this meeting about?" But the board member simply replied, "You'll find out soon." More people continued filling the room. Whispers spread everywhere. Then suddenly, the large conference hall doors closed. The room became silent. A senior board member stepped forward. His voice was calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen," everyone focused on him. "Today is a very important day for Whitmore Global." He paused. "For many years, our company has grown into one of the most powerful organizations in the country." Employees nodded proudly, but the man's next words shocked them. "And today," he said slowly, "the founder of Whitmore Global has decided to return." The room exploded with murmurs. "What? That's impossible. Daniel Whitmore?" Some employees had never seen the founder before. Others only knew his name from company history. Michael Turner's face suddenly turned pale. "This wasn't supposed to happen," the board member continued speaking. "He will be arriving shortly." The room fell into stunned silence. Meanwhile, several floors below, inside a private office, hidden from the crowd, a man stood calmly in front of a mirror. The worn coat was gone. The old beggar clothes were gone. In their place was a perfectly tailored black suit. The man slowly adjusted his tie, then he removed the dark glasses. His sharp eyes reflected clearly in the mirror Daniel Whitmore, the true owner of the company. He looked at his reflection for a long moment. Months of pretending, months of watching, months of testing people's hearts. And now, the moment had finally arrived. One of his assistants stepped into the room. "Mr. Whitmore," the man said respectfully, "everyone is waiting." Daniel nodded slowly. He took one deep breath, then he spoke quietly. "Bring Emily Carter to the building." The assistant looked surprised. "The cleaning girl?" Daniel's voice remained calm. "Yes." He turned toward the door. "Today, the entire company will learn a very important lesson. And within the next few minutes, every person inside Whitmore Global would witness something they never expected. The truth, the blind beggar they mocked every day, was the man who owned everything. And the revelation was about to begin. The massive conference hall inside Whitmore Global was filled to capacity. Executives sat in the front rows, department managers filled the middle seats, senior employees stood along the walls. Whispers floated through the air like nervous wind. Everyone was waiting for the man most of them had never seen. The mysterious founder of the company, Daniel Whitmore. At the front of the room, the members of the board of directors sat quietly, their faces serious. Michael Turner sat among the executives, trying to appear calm, but inside, his thoughts were racing. Why now? Why return today? His eyes moved nervously toward the large doors at the back of the hall. Suddenly, the doors slowly opened. 2 security guards stepped inside. Behind them walked a man in a perfectly tailored black suit. His posture was straight, his presence calm, but powerful. The entire room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned toward him. The man walked slowly down the aisle, step by step. Some employees leaned forward, trying to see his face clearly. Others whispered quietly, "Is that him?" That must be Daniel Whitmore. But several employees felt something strange, something familiar, a voice inside their minds whispering a memory they could not place. Daniel reached the front of the room and turned to face the crowd. For a moment, he said nothing. He simply looked at them. Hundreds of employees, many of them loyal, many of them hardworking, but some of them cruel, arrogant, greedy. Then Daniel finally spoke. "Good morning." The moment the words left his mouth, a wave of confusion spread across the room. Several employees looked at each other, their eyes widening. One man whispered nervously, "Wait, that voice?" Another employee leaned closer to his friend. "Why does it sound so familiar?" Daniel continued calmly. "It has been a long time since I stood in this building." His voice echoed clearly through the hall, and suddenly, someone gasped. A young employee near the back whispered loudly, "That's the blind man." The words spread quickly, like fire. "The beggar." The man outside the gate. "That's his voice." Shock spread across the room. People turned toward each other with disbelief. Michael Turner's face went completely pale. Daniel watched their reactions quietly. Then he reached into his pocket and slowly placed a familiar object on the table in front of him. A pair of dark glasses. The same glasses the blind beggar wore every day. Gasps filled the hall. A woman covered her mouth. "No, it can't be." Daniel's voice remained calm. "For the past 3 months," he said slowly, "I have been sitting outside this building." The room fell into complete silence. "Many of you saw me." He paused. "Many of you spoke to me." His eyes moved across the crowd. Some employees lowered their heads immediately. Others looked frozen in shock. Daniel continued, "I disguised myself as a blind beggar." The shock deepened. Michael Turner gripped the arms of his chair tightly. Daniel's next words hit the room like thunder. "Because I wanted to see the true character of the people working in my company." The entire hall felt heavy with tension. Daniel stepped forward slightly. "When people believe someone is powerless," he said quietly, "they reveal their real hearts." Some employees could no longer meet his gaze. They remembered their laughter, their insults, their cruel jokes. Daniel's voice grew firmer. "I heard every word." The silence became unbearable. Then his eyes moved toward one specific section of the room, where Richard Collins sat, sweating, terrified. Daniel spoke calmly. "Mr. Collins." Richard slowly stood up, his legs trembling. "You kicked a blind man's cup of coins across the ground." Richard's face drained of color. I didn't know." Daniel interrupted him gently. "That he owned the company?" The room remained completely silent. Richard could barely breathe. Daniel continued speaking. I also heard employees laugh when that same blind man collapsed in the rain. Several workers lowered their heads in shame. Daniel paused, then his voice softened slightly. But among all those voices, he said quietly, one person stood out. He turned toward the entrance of the hall. And today, he continued, I want everyone here to meet her. The doors at the back of the room slowly opened again. Employees turned in their seats. Standing at the entrance, looking confused and nervous, was Emily Carter. She had been brought to the building only minutes earlier by one of Daniel's assistants. She wore simple clothes, nothing like the polished suits filling the hall. She stepped inside carefully, unsure why she had been called. Hundreds of eyes stared at her. Emily looked frightened. Daniel smiled gently. Emily Carter. Her heart nearly stopped when she heard her name. She slowly walked forward. When she reached the front of the room, Daniel looked at her kindly. Then he said something that stunned the entire company. This young woman, he said clearly, was the only person who treated a blind beggar like a human being. The hall became completely silent again. Emily looked confused. Daniel continued. She shared her food. She defended him when others mocked him. She even spent her last money to help him when he collapsed in the rain. Several employees lowered their heads in shame. Daniel looked around the room. Then he said the words no one expected. While many of you showed arrogance, he paused, Emily Carter showed the heart of a true leader. Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. The executives looked shocked. Michael Turner stared in horror because something unbelievable was about to happen next, and within moments, Daniel Whitmore would make a decision that would change Emily's life forever. The conference hall remained completely silent. Hundreds of employees stared at Emily Carter, the quiet orphan girl who used to clean their offices. Only hours ago, most of them had never paid attention to her. Some had even mocked her. Now she stood at the front of the room beside the founder of the company. Her hands trembled slightly. "Sir, I don't understand," she said softly. Daniel Whitmore looked at her with a gentle expression. "You will," he replied calmly. Then he slowly turned back toward the crowd. Many employees still looked stunned, some ashamed, others confused. Daniel folded his hands behind his back and began speaking again. "There is another reason I returned to this company in disguise." The room listened carefully. "I did not come back only to observe character." He paused. "I came back because I was running out of time." The words confused many people. Michael Turner frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" someone whispered in the crowd. Daniel took a slow breath. Then he said quietly, 3 months ago, I received news from my doctor." The room became even more silent. "I was diagnosed with a severe heart condition." Emily's eyes widened. Daniel continued calmly, "The doctors told me my condition is rare and very aggressive." He placed one hand gently over his chest. "They said my time in this world may be very limited." A wave of shock spread through the room. Several employees exchanged uneasy glances. The powerful billionaire founder was dying. Daniel's voice remained steady, but there was a quiet sadness beneath it. "I spent my entire life building Whitmore Global." His eyes moved slowly across the hall. "This company is not just a business to me. It is the work of my lifetime." He paused again. "But when the doctor gave me the news," Daniel's voice softened, "I realized something terrifying." The room waited. I had no one I could truly trust to protect it. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Daniel continued, "Over the years, many people inside this company began to care more about power than about people." His eyes briefly passed over Michael Turner, and I knew that if the wrong person took control, he sighed, the company would lose its soul. The words hung heavily in the room. Daniel turned slightly toward Emily. "That is why I decided to search for someone different. Someone who valued kindness, someone who treated others with dignity, someone whose heart was stronger than their ambition." He looked directly at the employees. But finding such a person inside a powerful corporation is not easy. Some workers lowered their heads. Daniel continued, "So I disguised myself as a blind beggar. When people believe someone has nothing," he said quietly, "they stop pretending. They reveal their true nature." Some employees felt their faces burn with shame. Daniel slowly walked across the front of the room. For 3 months I watched. I listened. I recorded everything. He pulled the small leather notebook from his pocket. "This notebook contains the truth about many of you." No one spoke. The room felt tense. Daniel opened the notebook and glanced at its pages. Then he closed it again. "But during those months," he continued softly, "one person kept surprising me." His eyes moved toward Emily again. Emily Carter. She looked overwhelmed. Daniel smiled kindly. She helped a blind stranger gather coins from the ground. She defended him when others mocked him. She shared her food when she barely had enough for herself. And when he collapsed in the rain, Daniel's voice slowed slightly, she spent the last money she had to help him. Several people in the audience felt tears forming in their eyes. Daniel's voice grew emotional. "Emily did not know who I was. She believed I was a helpless man on the street. And yet she treated me with more respect than many executives in this building." Emily looked down, embarrassed by the attention. "I was only doing what anyone should do," she whispered. Daniel shook his head gently. "No," he said softly, "you were doing what many people forgot how to do. Kindness, compassion, humanity." The room remained silent. Daniel took another slow breath. "Which is why," he continued carefully, "I believe Emily Carter possesses the most important quality a leader can have." Everyone leaned forward slightly. Daniel's next words would change everything, because the decision he had been preparing for months was about to be revealed, and when it was, the entire company would be shocked. The conference hall remained silent, the weight of Daniel Whitmore's words hanging heavily in the air. Hundreds of employees stared at Emily Carter, the young orphan girl who had once been laughed at, mocked, and dismissed. Daniel stepped closer to the center of the hall, his voice calm but firm. "After months of careful observation, I have made my decision." Every head turned toward him. The executives held their breath. Even Michael Turner seemed frozen in shock. "I am passing on the leadership of Whitmore Global to someone I trust." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Someone you all know, someone you've overlooked. Someone who showed kindness, courage, and integrity when no one else did." All eyes shifted to Emily. Her mouth opened slightly, speechless. She had never imagined, never dared to hope what Daniel was about to say. Daniel's gaze swept across the room. "Emily Carter will be the new Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Global." A collective gasp filled the hall. Some employees whispered to each other in disbelief. "No, that can't be true." "Emily, the cleaning girl?" Richard Collins froze completely, his jaw tightening. Michael Turner's confident composure cracked. Daniel's voice cut through the murmurs. "She may not have the fancy degree or the polished suit, but she has what this company needs most, a good heart." Emily's knees shook. She wanted to speak, but no words came out. Tears filled her eyes. Daniel stepped forward and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You have proven that true leadership is not about power or wealth, but about compassion, courage, and integrity." Several employees lowered their heads, ashamed. They remembered the times they had laughed at her, the times they had mocked her for helping the blind beggar. Michael Turner whispered to himself, disbelief and fear in his voice. "This can't happen." Daniel's eyes turned to him, sharp and commanding. "Do not underestimate the value of kindness, Mr. Turner. It is more powerful than ambition, greed, or deceit." Some employees felt a lump form in their throats. Others quietly wiped tears from their eyes. Then Daniel continued, his voice softening. "I am not well, and my time is limited. That is why I needed someone I could trust, someone who would not let this company fall into the hands of arrogance and greed." He turned back to Emily. You will take my place, Emily. Lead this company with compassion, protect our people, honor the legacy of Whitmore Global. The room fell silent again. Slowly a hand went up. Richard Collins. Mr. Whitmore, I am sorry. Truly, I mocked you. I mocked her. I was wrong. Other executives hesitated, then began speaking one by one. We are sorry. We didn't see. We didn't understand. Emily's eyes welled with tears. She never expected forgiveness or acknowledgement. She had only acted because it was right. Daniel nodded slowly. You may ask for forgiveness, but remember this. The work you do going forward will show whether you have truly learned. Then, taking one final step forward, he gestured to Emily. Emily Carter, this is your company now. Lead it well. Emily, trembling, stepped forward. She felt the weight of responsibility, the enormity of what was happening. She looked out at the sea of faces, people she had once feared, people who had doubted her, people who had laughed at her. But now, she was their leader. Her voice was quiet at first, then stronger. I will do my best, she said. A few employees clapped softly at first, then gradually the applause grew louder. Even some of those who had mocked her could not hide the pride and relief in their hearts. Daniel Whitmore, watching from the front, felt a rare smile spread across his face. His mission was complete. His heart, though weakened by illness, was filled with peace. For the first time in weeks, he truly believed Whitmore Global would be in good hands. And Emily, the orphan girl who had shown courage, kindness, and integrity when no one else did, would guide the company into a new era. The room erupted in emotion, applause, tears, whispers of astonishment. Some executives rushed to Emily, apologizing again. Some bowed their heads in shame. But through it all, Emily stood tall, calm, and steady, realizing that her compassion, her simple acts of kindness, had changed everything. Daniel Whitmore quietly stepped back, placing the leather notebook into Emily's hands. Keep this, he said softly. It holds the lessons I learned, and the truths I saw in others. Never forget them. Emily held the notebook tightly, tears streaming down her face. The employees, now witnessing true leadership, understood the moral of the story. Kindness, courage, integrity, the power of a good heart. And for everyone who had mocked, judged, or dismissed others, it was a moment of awakening. Whitmore Global had changed forever, and Emily Carter, the girl who had once been overlooked, laughed at, and called helpless, had become a symbol of hope, strength, and humanity. The conference hall was still buzzing with whispers, applause, and quiet sobs. Emily Carter stood at the podium, holding Daniel Whitmore's leather notebook in her hands. Her hands trembled slightly, but her heart was steady. She looked across the room at hundreds of faces, some proud, some ashamed, all attentive. Daniel Whitmore sat quietly at the front, his suit immaculate, his posture straight but fragile. The illness he had hidden from the world weighed heavily on him now. Each breath came slowly, deliberately. Emily stepped forward, taking a deep breath. I will do everything in my power to lead this company with compassion, integrity, and honesty, she said softly. The applause began again, louder this time, but Emily's eyes were drawn to Daniel. He smiled gently at her. A mixture of pride and bittersweet emotion filled his gaze. Later that afternoon, after the conference, Daniel and Emily walked through the empty corridors of Whitmore Global. You did more than I could have hoped, Daniel said quietly, his voice faint. Emily shook her head. I only did what was right. You showed me that the right thing matters more than wealth or status. Daniel's eyes grew distant for a moment. My time may be limited, he whispered. His hand went to his chest. The pain that had been growing over months was now constant. Emily grasped his hand gently. You've done enough. You've shown me and everyone here what true leadership is. Daniel smiled faintly. Then it is your time now to carry this forward, to show everyone that kindness is stronger than greed, and courage stronger than fear. Over the next few days, Emily stepped fully into her role as CEO. She walked through the offices with a calm, confident presence. She greeted employees with warmth, listened to concerns, and made thoughtful decisions. Even those who had mocked her or Daniel could not hide the change in their hearts. Richard Collins approached her one morning, his head bowed. I am sorry, Emily. Truly, I judged you unfairly." Emily nodded softly. "Thank you. Let's focus on making this company stronger together." Word spread quickly throughout the company. Employees began helping each other more. Greed slowly gave way to collaboration. Laughter returned, not the cruel kind, but genuine laughter, respect, and encouragement. And outside, the city streets where Daniel had once sat as a blind beggar remained the same, but something had changed. Emily often thought of that rainy day, the small coins on the pavement, and the first time she helped Daniel without knowing who he was. It reminded her that the simplest acts of kindness could ripple far beyond what anyone imagined. One evening, as the sun set behind the glass towers of Whitmore Global, Daniel sat quietly in his office, watching Emily from a distance. The notebook was open on his desk. He wrote slowly, "A good heart can change everything." He leaned back, feeling the familiar ache in his chest. He knew his time was coming, but he also knew he had done the most important thing a man could do. He had found someone worthy to carry his legacy forward. And when Daniel Whitmore passed quietly, peacefully a few months later, the company was in the safest hands it could ever be. Emily Carter, the orphan girl whose compassion had proved stronger than all the mockery, arrogance, and greed. Whitmore Global thrived. Employees worked with integrity. The executives who had once been cruel now led with humility. And the story of the blind beggar who revealed the heart of a company spread far beyond the city. Emily often remembered Daniel's words, "When people think you are powerless, they show their true selves. But kindness, that is the strength no one can see coming." And she carried that truth into every decision she made. The company had not just survived, it had transformed, and a simple act of kindness had created a legacy that would last for generations. The city would never forget the day a poor orphan girl helped a blind man, and the blind man, in turn, changed the world.
Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We'd love to hear from your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.